So, how do we bring hope and make meaning in our lives as we're living our lives day to day? Is hope something that just, occasionally like pops into our life and then it goes away, or is it more of how we live our lives that bring a consistency to it? I was thinking about that this week as we were thinking about, the rhythm of spirituality. And I was thinking about, as Maya talked about with the children, about how they have these young bodies that like to move and shake and everything. And as we get older, moving through the generations, our bodies get stronger and they get taller and they get larger. And then sometimes they become more fragile again. And I was thinking about that in relation to our spirits. As our spirits age within these bodies, do they get tired or do they get renewed and regenerated and energized? Does the spirit age? What an interesting question, right? So here's a few things to just think about for today. I've asked you these questions before, but I think they're good to reflect on. How many of you want to be the same person in 5 years that you are now? I don't see anybody raising their hand. What about in 10 years? How many of you have the same understanding of God or ultimate reality as an adult that you had as children? I'm still not seeing anybody raise their hands. How many of you feel that your faith or your sense of spirituality or grounding is stronger now as an adult? I'm seeing a lot of people raise their hands. So, isn't that interesting that as we age and we go through this process sometimes of the grief around letting go of certain aspects of what our body is doing or not allowing us to do anymore, we, in many ways, can be and are growing stronger within our spirits. So, our bodies and our spirits perhaps don't quite age the same way. It's just something to think about. In many ways, we are a death defying culture. And I kind of feel like it's over the years and over the decades, I think it's getting a little bit better. But as a death defying culture, I think in many respects that also means that we are also an age defying culture. But is it possible that aging is actually something to look forward to? We tend to have this romantic idea of what life was like as children or as teenagers or as young adults. And we always talk about, oh, going back to those good old days. But what if the good old days are still ahead of us? Or what if the good old days are right now? Or what if the good old days are wherever we are in space and time? I have to admit that I've never actually understood the fear of wrinkles or the fear of gray hair. And it's interesting because we look at some of these Hollywood actors who are in their 70s and 80s and still working really hard to appear that they are in their 30s or 40s. And I've always found that just a little bit odd because working hard to look like you're 50 years younger than you are doesn't make you 50 years younger than you are. And by the way, what's wrong with being 50 years older than somebody else is? I think it's interesting just to think about the paradigm. We try so hard to hold on to something without just allowing our minds, our bodies, our spirits to just let go and release and change and move in the direction that it needs to move. And that's what Maya was talking about today with the kiddos, that as their little young bodies are growing, they're going to want to be moving in certain ways. But we never stop moving. And it's okay that there's not one better way to move than another better way to move. And in fact, sometimes part of the movements is allowing our bodies to rest. And there's nothing wrong with rest. So I just invite us today to sit with what it means to kind of be in the rhythm of our lives, to be in the cycle of our lives as we go through years, and then we go through decades, and then we go through generations. There's something in my mind really beautiful in that. There's something really beautiful in just gracefully going along with the cycles of life. And one of my favorite analogies is the spiral staircase. And I use that in relation to grief a lot, but it can be used in relation to aging or growing, that it may seem that at times we are going around in circles and we see ourselves coming back to the same place, but what we don't realize is that it's not really the same place because we're seeing it from a different level. And so every time we come around, we're seeing it from an elevated level from where we saw it a year ago or a decade ago or even a generation ago. And there's nothing wrong with that, because with each turn of that spiral staircase, we grow a year wiser. We have new insight. We have a new perspective. We have things that we've let go of. We've had new things that we've embraced, and our lives are richer and even more whole. And so I think I've always just seen the true beauty in wrinkles and silver hair, because there's a beauty, a wisdom, and an authenticity that is what I'm drawn to. And yet, in many ways, we still kind of shy away from this, as if getting older or aging is something to push away or be scared of. But I think what I'd like us to just sit with a little bit today is, what does it mean to be an authentic, full human being as we each move through the different stages of life? As you look back on your life, was there one stage that was or is more desirable than others? Because any of us that have lived a number of decades, there are going to be times in our life when we look back and say, yeah, that was really, really hard. And I'm glad that I've moved through this. And then there are going to be other stages where we say that really is bittersweet and brings me some really beautiful memories. But I think the key when we look back, it's okay to look back, but we can't forget that we can also look forward. That just because some of us probably have more in our past than we may have in our future, it doesn't mean that our future is not worth moving into. And so I think it's important to not romanticize the generations before us. And it's important to not forget to live in the moments. I've told this story a few times, but I'm going to tell it again because I figure if a story is worth telling once, it's probably worth telling again because not everybody was in the sanctuary to hear it the first time, and not everybody was probably listening the first time. But I had this idea, and I don't know why I had this idea because I think when you're young, you think you know things when you don't really know things. But I kind of had this idea that the best friends I would ever make were supposed to be made in college, high school or college, and then you just go on with your life and you become a boring adult, right? Like that's kind of how I think 20-year-olds kind of think. Um, and then a few years ago, actually, probably not a few years ago, it was probably more like 10 or 11 years ago, one of our beloved elders named Bill Timer was he passed away, and I was talking to his daughter, and he died. I think he was in his 90s, or he was late 80s or 90s. And she said, the best friends that he made in his 80s. She said, my dad worked so hard all of his life, and he just was one foot in front of the other. And it wasn't until he was in his 80s that he was able to slow down and really make genuine friendship. And that was such a paradigm shift for me because I don't know why I thought you can't make friends after a certain age. But it was just a reminder. I guess actually, probably it was a little bit of the arrogance of youth because, when we're young, we kind of think we know everything and we don't really realize the generations above us have some of that wisdom. But it was just such an important reminder that life never stops. It never ends, and it's never too late to build the type of life that you want, to build the type of relationships that you want, to move forward with the joy and the laughter and the friendship at whatever age that you're at. It might change. You might move from that phase of life where you're in a career to that phase of life where you're retired. But there's as much meaning in retirement as there is in the middle of the career. And there's as much meaning in the the joy of being a young mother as there is in being a grandparent or being just that wonderful confidant that children can go to as a safe place. I want us to just think about that today. The rhythm of the spirit, that the spirit doesn't actually age or get tired. The body might age, the body might get tired, but our spirits are eternal. And so, what does that mean? And what does that mean for spiritual growth? To me, it means that we can read as many books as we want to. We can listen to as many sermons as we want to. And we can either let that wisdom sink into us and we can be changed, or we can go through life and say, I've learned everything that I need to learn, and I don't have anything left to learn. And I hope that none of us here ever get to the place where we realize that we don't have anything left to learn, because there's always something left to learn. There's always a place to grow. I remember years ago on Oprah, when I watched Oprah back in the 80s, so I must have been really little, but I remember she was interviewing an old man who was in his 90s, and he was learning to read for the first time. He'd gone through his whole life not knowing how to read, and he decided, nope, I'm not too old. I'm going to learn how to read. I remember the story that my mother told me that my grandmother learned how to ride a bike in her 80s. And apparently I guess my grandfather loved to ride bikes and she didn't know how to ride a bike. So when he was at work or when he would go away, she taught herself how to ride a bike so that one day she could just be like, I think we should go for a bike ride. And she got on her bike and she just surprised him. But she was in her 80s when she did that. And it's fun to think about where we are, but it's also fun to think about it's fun to think about where we've been. It's fun to think about where we are, but it's also okay to think about where we're going. And it's okay to be excited about where we're going, no matter what age you find yourself in or what rhythm of life you find yourself in. It's never, ever too late to just start over. And I think I'll just leave it at that and invite all of you to maybe spend the day thinking about where you've been, where you are now, and where you think you might be going. And my invitation is to do that meditation with a little bit of joy and excitement about where life is headed for you. And our closing hymn this morning is Love Will Guide Us, number 131. But not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Go now in peace. Amen.